Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly.
Good evening and welcome to the live stream open house for the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. I'd like to start off with what might be some good news. We are receiving some rain in our area, so if we do experience technical difficulties, it would be due to that. We do have thunder and lightning and rain, so that is good news for Tucson. I'd like to introduce colleagues here. Renee Darling and Ed Beck will be helping me present the material this evening. We are in a large room, socially distant. This is one of the first meetings that TEP has held with multiple people present in the same room. We're doing this in an effort to continue our public outreach, as public outreach is an important part of the process for the CEC, and we recognize how important this project is not only to TEP, but also to the public as well. And just to note on that note, we are maintaining social distance. We're probably spread out 20 feet apart. TEP takes the safety of not only its employees, but the public very, very high. So that is why we are here presenting tonight rather than in person. So throughout the presentation, we do have breaks built in where we can ask, where we have question and answer opportunities. You will not be able to speak with a presenter directly. However, you will be able to either text in your question or you can call and speak to an operator. If you do text in, we ask that you please start with your name and your neighborhood and text your question. And for those that are listening, the text in number is 520-302-5527. And then if you'd like to call in and ask a question, speak to a customer service representative. We do have bilingual representatives available. So if you feel more comfortable speaking Spanish, those representatives are available. That number is 520-918-9206. Once again, this is the 138 kV, the open house for the 138 kV Kino to DeMoss-Petrie line. And the live stream event will be presenting all the material before you. My name is Eric Rotz. I'm the manager of operations planning and responsible for the day-to-day studies in support of the bulk electric system, as well as oversight of the line siting team and help with the preparation of the application to be presented before the line siting committee and then onward up to the Arizona Corporation Commission. And on to Renee.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Renee Darling, and I am a supervisor in our Land Resources Department. Our department oversees the preparation of the resource studies as well as the geospatial analysis that we'll be discussing tonight. And we also pull the Arizona Corporation Commission application for a certificate of environmental compatibility together for filing.
Hi, I'm Ed Beck. I have extensive experience in design, development, and siting of transmission lines at TEP, and I'm here to support this siting process for this project.
Thank you. Moving on. We've gone over the introduction, so just an update of how we got to where we are today. Prior to this, we did have 2 in-person meetings, one at the south end of the project and one at the northern end of the project, or central portion of the project. And we had scheduled 2 additional in-person meetings scheduled for March 17th and 18th. But due to the COVID pandemic, TEP wanted to ensure the safety of not only the employees, but also the public. So those meetings were canceled, and the public was notified via various media sources. And we had posted online project update, and this project update was available April 17th, and a news mailing went out, or excuse me, a postcard went out notifying the public that this online project update was available for viewing. As a result of the online project update, we did receive over 200 comments, received and responded to over 200 comments regarding the project. So the online project update provided an overview of the project, the purpose and need of the project, information regarding potential line route links, and that was the meat of the update really, and a request for public input regarding the potential line route links. So why are we here today? A virtual open house. As I've said, first and foremost is the safety of the public and TEP employees. So we're happy to be able to continue the public outreach process, keep this going, and because this project has been identified as a need in TEP's long-term planning requirements. Studies beginning in 2008 identified this as a need, a future need for 2023, and we're quickly approaching 2023, and energy demand within the service area keeps increasing. TEP must continue public outreach during the pandemic to keep the project on schedule. And on June 29th, Governor Ducey signed an executive order prohibiting gatherings of people of 50 or more. So, as I've said, there are several ways to submit a question throughout this process. We have the text message option, which is 520-302-5527. And we also have the phone-in option, which is 520-918-9206. We ask that you please state your name and your neighborhood when you text in a message, and we also have bilingual customer service representatives ready to handle your question and transfer it accordingly. And we ask that you, if you could, keep the questions pertinent to the information that we've covered thus far. We will have a general question and answer session at the end of the presentation. And any questions that we do not get to, we'll respond and upload on the TEP.com Kino to DeMoss-Petrie project website. So we do have some questions coming in. The first question we have is, why is TEP placing those lines in the middle of town? Why not use batteries to offset energy? Well, currently, the existing infrastructure within town is 46 kV, and the voltage class cannot support the energy demand that we have forecasted. Every year seems to be hotter than the last, and energy demand seems to keep increasing. So we need to be able to support that energy demand with a higher voltage class. And batteries require a large area in order for what megawatt you'd get out of them, and also they are not always readily available. They can discharge up to 4 hours, but after those 4 hours they have to be recharged. And we have a question for Renee. It's a call-in question. Will the lines only be along the arterials and not any residential streets?
So TEP does work hard to site the transmission lines on arterial streets. We'll be going over the routes later in the meeting, but there are a few locations where residential streets are proposed, and the reason being the location of the UA North substation and just the nature of the urban area that we're in requires us to look at a number of alternatives, and some of those are on residential streets.
Okay, we have a question for Ed. Will my rates increase because of this project?
Well, that's a good question, and at this point it's very hard to determine what the impact of the project will be on future rates. There are several things that your rates cover today, including the generation mix, the facilities that we build, as well as personnel to maintain and operate our system. And this project ultimately would roll into our rate base and be a component of our rates in the future. But that is a process that goes through Corporation Commission approval, and we need to be able to verify that there was a need for the project, that the right value or the right cost of the project was incurred, and we need that approval from the Commission before it even goes into the rate base. So it's not at a point where we can say what impact it will have on rates for this specific project.
Thank you for that. Those are all the questions we have at this time. Once again, this is the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line live stream open house. We thank you all for attending and being here, and appreciate any input you have. Next, we have an overview of the CEC process. Renee, take it away.
So the chart shown on the screen is depicts the process that TEP goes through to site transmission lines that are greater than 115 kilovolts in voltage. It is a Arizona Corporation Commission requirement that we get approval from the ACC for those types of projects. Once the project is identified and we know the endpoints and the interconnection, any other interconnections the project requires, we develop what we call a preliminary study area. The preliminary study area is shared with the public, the local jurisdictions, and other stakeholders so that we can start to gather information about the constraints and opportunities for constructing a line within the study area. After that, we then develop what we call line route links. These are segments of line that are broken at intersecting points, and each link allows us to look individually at the link during the analysis of the project. So as we do our geospatial analysis, as we collect comments from the public and the stakeholders, we're able to narrow those links down to where we can develop preliminary alternative routes. The preliminary alternative routes are then shared again with our stakeholders and the public, and we continue to collect data. We continue to collect comments from the public, and eventually narrow those preliminary routes down to a preferred and up to 2 alternatives that we move forward into our application that we file with the Arizona Corporation Commission. That process that I just described is constantly cyclical with, providing information to the public and the stakeholders and receiving information back from the public and our stakeholders, and in developing those routes that eventually make it into the application. Once the application is filed, it is heard before the Arizona Power Plant and Line Citing Committee in an open hearing that the public can attend and comment during. Following the hearing, the Line Citing Committee makes a recommendation to the Arizona Corporation Commission as to which alternative they recommend being approved. The Arizona Corporation Commission then hears the application in an open meeting, and they determine whether they agree with the Line Citing Committee, whether or not they modify that determination, or whether they select a different alternative, or whether they deny the application. So once that process is complete, and assuming we are granted a CEC for one of the routes we put forward in the application, we then move forward with the design of the project within that approved corridor. We do all of our permitting for the project. We do land right and right-of-way acquisition, and then ultimately go into the construction of the project. And this chart here just shows the timeline of all of those activities. We're in Q3 of 2020 in Outreach 3. As I said, we'll be moving into Outreach 4, which is where we'll have another open house meeting prior to filing our application. And then the next opportunity to comment would be at the line citing hearing, which we anticipate to be in January of 2021, and the ACC meeting to be in March of 2021.
Thank you, Renee. We have another question break. Once again, we are speaking about the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. We have several ways in which you can ask questions. We have the text message option. That number is 520-302-5527. And we also have the option to speak directly to a customer service representative, and that number is 520-918-9206. We do have bilingual CSR, so if you're more comfortable with Spanish, they can take your call and question. Let's see, it looks like we do have a couple questions. We have a text question for Ed. How will this affect traffic?
So the impact on traffic of our construction process along the line route will be relatively minor. We would require potentially lane closures on an outside lane as we're installing a structure in any particular location. And we're talking days at any location, 1 or 2 days, not prolonged periods. So the impact to traffic will be relatively minor.
Thank you, Ed. And Renee, we have a question, a text question. What happens if the ACC rejects the proposal?
So if the Arizona Corporation Commission rejects the proposal, then TEP would have to come back and look and see if there are any other ways to serve the project. I would like Ed to weigh in on this question as well.
Yeah, a little bit more information on that. If the ACC, first of all, the ACC ultimately can either approve or reject our proposed project. And if we do a good job of showing them that there's a need for the project, the likelihood that the project in total gets turned down is somewhat small. They can require us to do many modifications to the project that we propose. One extreme could be ordering us to build an underground line. So the actuality of them denying the proposal, they need to work with us in helping us to serve the customers that we serve. But in the end, if they did deny our proposal, we would be back at the drawing board and coming up with a new way of serving our customers.
I believe we did lose Ed at the end of that discussion, so if you'd like further information on that, I'm not exactly sure where he left off, please ask the question again and we'll be sure to follow up with that. Thank you once again for joining. This is the live stream of the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. My name is Eric, along with my colleagues Renee and Ed, who is innuendo at the moment, not present on the screen, but some technical difficulties as we spoke about. Oh, there he is. So moving forward, we'll be discussing the project purpose and need. And so as I had spoken to earlier, this project was identified in long-term planning studies as early as 2008. Given the forecasted energy demand, we're quickly approaching that energy demand. So we've got to get the project in service. Existing facilities are now approaching the capacity thresholds identified in the 2008, driving the needs for the project. Project drivers, energy demand within the project area has increased. The existing 46 kV system within the study area is reaching the end of its useful life and needs replacement and cannot support increasing demand. So even though if we did replace this equipment, we would still require additional projects in order to support the increasing energy demand within the study area. And then some distribution lines in the study area have reached or are approaching their capacity limitations. So just an overview of the area that we are discussing currently. In the upper left-hand corner of the map is, in the blue triangle, is the existing DeMoss-Petrie substation that will be a point of interconnection. The red lines represent our existing 138 kV system. and the pink lines represent the existing 46 kV sub-transmission system. You can see within the study area, the yellow triangle is the planned UA North substation. All surrounding this area is the just 46 kV supporting load within this area. The 46 kV system is a radial system, which means that if we lose a line serving that load, there is no redundancy built in. So we've lost ability to serve that load unless we switch to serving another way. There's different options. And towards the bottom of the map is the existing Kino 138 kV substation. We've recently completed that, and there is one line currently serving that, and that is a radial line as well, a radial 138 kV transmission line. As I stated, within this area, the energy demand, it keeps increasing, but however, the 46 kV system cannot support the energy demand within the study area. So, project benefits. As I've stated, improved electric reliability. We'll be creating redundancy in the system, so we'll have 2 points of interconnection into each substation, such as the Kino substation. We'll be looping that into the existing 138 kV transmission system, as well as the planned UA North substation. Replacement of aging infrastructure. Large transformer, electric switchgear, and other substation equipment currently providing service to some area customers are nearing the end of their useful lives and must be replaced within the next 5 years. And support for the University of Arizona and the Banner University Medical Center, Tucson campus and emergency room. So additional project benefits, as I've been stating, the project will create a looped 138 kV transmission system to interconnect both Kino and UA North 138 kV substations to TEP's existing transmission system. This loop system will add redundancy by serving both UA North and Kino from 2 directions. UA North substation will alleviate demand placed on existing 46 kV circuits, providing contingency support in and around the study area, allowing TEP greater flexibility to respond to outages. This will provide additional contingency support within our existing 46 kV system. It'll offload some of the circuits, allowing room for that contingency support. And UA North substation will interconnect with TEP's 138 kV system, which provides greater service reliability and additional capacity to serve future energy needs. So, project description. We will be constructing a new single circuit 138 kV transmission line to interconnect the existing Kino 138 kV substation located at the southern portion of the project, interconnect to the planned UA North 138 kV substation, and finally terminating at the existing DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV substation. So this is the construction of a new single circuit 138 kV transmission line. So what we have here is the study area, which Renee had spoken to earlier. The study area is created by identifying the connection points. Once we've identified the connection points and the area, the load area, we determine the study area. The study area identifies all of the notification area that will receive mailings regarding the projects and updates regarding the projects. It also is the area in which all the studies are conducted in support of the CEC. So as I said, the line will be a single circuit 138 kV transmission line structure. And TEP's standard is the weathering steel structures, tubular weathering steel monopoles. The typical height ranges between 75 and 110 feet. As you can see on the schematic on the left of the screen, We have shown a double circuit configuration, and on the right side of that schematic we have shown the single circuit configuration. And we also have provided a picture of what one of the structures looks like in reality. The span length between structures is anywhere between 600 and 1,000 feet. And the poles per mile ranges between 5 to 9 structures, and the right-of-way width is up to 100 feet. So we have another question break. I'm Eric, along with Renee and Ed, and we are speaking to the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. We appreciate you all joining in. Appreciate your questions. So we have various ways in which you can ask the questions. The first is text message. That number is 520-302-5527. And you can also speak to a bilingual operator. That number is 520-918-9206. And we do have some questions coming in, so I'd like to start out with this question will be for Ed. It's a text from Ted Earl in Jefferson Park. Did you consider building a gas turbine generator to provide power?
It's a legitimate question. The source of power that we use for our system is part of a much larger study, which is called the Integrated Resource Plan, that we as a utility are required to file with the Corporation Commission. And we've looked at many different alternatives for generation resources to meet our needs. And in the longer term, we're looking at renewables as a big part of our future component of generation. Gas turbines were put in at our Irvington plant recently, and those are in support of our plan to build out a bunch of renewables, because we do need some basically steel on the ground that supports the renewable projects. So long answer to the question is, yes, we did consider gas turbines as part of our mix, but that is a separate issue from the infrastructure to deliver the energy to our customers.
Thank you, Ed. We have another text from Jean Calhoun. Is the increase in energy demand related to the expansion of Banner Hospital? If so, will Banner provide funding to assist in placing the line portion underground through the neighborhood? And this question is for Ed.
Yeah, another good question. All of our customers are contributing to the load growth in our area throughout our whole service territory, as well as the project study area in particular. So Banner Hospital is contributing to that. Again, the methodology for undergrounding a line is through the formation of an underground improvement district. It's at the direction or the control of the city of Tucson. And through that process, the group working on that determines allocations of cost to various participants. So if Banner is part of that improvement district, they would get some kind of allocation, but that would be determined through the formation of the district.
Thank you, Ed. We have another text question from Alice Rowe with Glenman Elm. Will these lines affect the cell service in the vicinity of the corridors where the lines will go? And that is for...
Maybe I'll take that.
Okay.
That's another good question. We have no issues with cell service relative to our transmission lines. We do have transmission lines throughout our service territory, and we have had no complaints from individuals concerning their cell phone service. So we don't expect any issues to come about. We are under order whenever we get a CEC from the Corporation Commission to build a line, to follow communication issues, and to resolve them in an expedient fashion should they occur. But we don't expect any issues with cell phones.
Thank you, Ed. Another text from David from Jefferson Park. How far apart can the poles be How many poles in a mile? And could the lines go out to Campbell, east boundary of Jefferson Park, then north to Grant? Thank you very much for the question. As stated previously, the poles can range anywhere from 600 to 1,000 feet. I've seen poles even longer, or excuse me, the distance between poles even longer. It's all situational, but our average is 600 to 1,000 feet, so that ranges between 5 to 9 poles per mile. With regards to where the poles are going to be placed, we will be discussing routes that we're going to be proposing for comment from the public further on in this presentation, so I'll wait to answer that. It has not been determined what side of the road right now any structure would be placed on. We've just determined at this point some routes. So we do have another text from Carol Dorsey, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name up front there. Why not put the line directly down Cherry or Park, which is to say through the middle of campus? Alternatively, please bury them. This is for Ed.
So we did look at both the use of Cherry and Park. The major problem along Cherry is that the university has an extensive underground system in Cherry itself that would conflict with any placement of poles for the overhead line, or even if we were to underground, there's no place to put the line along Cherry. Relative to Park, there are issues with the Sunlink streetcar in that we cannot get permission from the city to take that streetcar out of service for the construction process that we would need to utilize going down Park. So that's why those two links are not really being considered on a go-forward basis.
Thank you, Ed. We have another question for Renee. Is it possible some of your plans may impact Thrive in the 05, Move Tucson, and or Bus Rapid Transit Corridor projects? Have you had conversations about this?
Yes, so we have those entities are, and the city folks that are working on them are stakeholders in this process. We have talked to them. We're documenting, any concerns they may have with those segments of the line, and it's again part of the process of working from these multiple preliminary routes we have down to what we're going to actually file in the application. If one of the routes we select is has the potential to impact one of those projects, then the application would so state, and it would describe how we would mitigate those impacts.
Thank you, Renee. We have another text question here from Dorothy from Jefferson Park. This is for Ed. Are safety measures planned to protect residents living near the line in case of disasters like an earthquake, as the proposed routes are near underground gas lines? High voltage lines near gas pipes could cause an explosion.
Yes, Dorothy. We, for TEP, safety is number one. So we take safety to the nth degree. And relative to the gas lines that would be around the transmission line, if there are some in the vicinity, we also are under order by the Commission in the CEC process to do specific studies related to those gas lines and any impacts the line might have relative to those. But I would like to point out that the Federal Energy Management Administration had a study done regarding transmission lines and specifically earthquakes. And one of their findings was that transmission lines are very minimally impacted by earthquakes. They really don't cause problems. And relative to the gas lines being in the vicinity of an overhead line, it's much more likely that were there some kind of an explosion that results from a gas leak that would occur, it more likely would be pointed to water heater pilot lights or sparks from falling objects or vehicle accidents. But again, safety is very important, and we will take into consideration the safety concerns of any gas lines throughout the process.
Thank you, Ed. That is the end of the questions in this area. Thank you again for all your questions. Please keep them coming as we move on to the next section in the presentation. We have outreach, and this will be covered by Renee.
Yes, so this slide summarizes the outreach that TEP has conducted since we kicked off the project in September 2019. We are continuously providing the local government officials with briefings on where we're at in the process and what the timeline is for the project, as it has, shifted somewhat due to COVID. We had our first public outreach in October of 2019. And we tried to have our second outreach in March of 2020, but unfortunately had to cancel those meetings due to COVID. We did, however, provide a project update in April of 2020 on the project webpage. This is our third public outreach, and we do intend to have at least one more virtual open house meeting prior to filing our application with the ACC, so that we can collect any additional comments related to the routes that we will be putting forth in the application. The slide also shows the other meetings that we would have had with our stakeholders and with the community working group. So this slide summarizes the number of comments that TEP has received since as of July 2020, which is when we started the phase 2 of our geospatial analysis. I will talk about that more later in the meeting. We have responded to 85% of those comments. 10% did not require a response, and 5% we were unable to respond to, as there was no contact information left that we could send a response back to. On the right side of the screen, you'll see a pie chart, and that shows the major topics of concern that we are getting comments on. And then in each slice of the pie, it shows the number of comments we have received in that category.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Okay, now we are on the correct slide there. Thank you for that, Renee. It's the thing about being live, you get to work through these things. So thank you for bearing with us. We have received several comments with regards to the appearance and how it will impact the area. Some of those comments are with regards to undergrounding of existing distribution. If the proposed transmission line falls in line, the same alignment as an existing distribution line, TEP will look first to see if that existing distribution line is needed. And if it is, it'll look to relocate that or underground it. Some of the complications with that is if there are communication attachments on those distribution lines, makes it a little more difficult to underground those, as we're not responsible for the undergrounding of the communications. There's been comments with regards to the pole finish, silver or gray, not the rust or the weathering steel. TEP does have the standard of the weathering steel. This is a more cost-effective standard, as well as a more environmentally friendly standard. The process in which the poles get galvanized is not an environmentally friendly process at all. There's been discussion with regards to the height and width of the poles. The height and width of the poles is larger in both height and diameter than typical distribution pole. However, the voltage class is higher, so we have to make sure to maintain our clearances from wire to ground, driving the height of the pole up, which ultimately drives the diameter of the pole up. However, this has a tendency as well to kind of clean up an area in the effect that we can space these out further than we can distribution poles, and we do not allow the communication attachments onto the transmission lines. So moving on to historic properties with Renee.
Yes, so we have received 166 comments up till July of 2020 related to historic properties and historic districts. TEP is in the process of conducting a built environment study that is being conducted by a third-party consultant who is comparing and contrasting the potential impacts to visual impacts, individual historic property impacts, as well as overall impacts to the historic districts. Those, the study is being overseen by the City of Tucson's Historic Preservation Officer. She will review the study for accuracy, and then once it's approved, we will use that information to look at quantifiably at the comparing each of the routes against the other. And that'll be used in the Phase 3 Geospatial Analysis that I discuss later. So we also have received a number of comments related to residential use and potential impacts to property values. For the residential use, that is one of the categories that we also compare and contrast the routes against. So the percent of residential use that is adjacent to each route is compared against the other. And the routes with the least amount of residential use adjacent to them have higher scores than the routes that have more residential use adjacent to them. Related to property values, TEP did recently participate in a study that the Bureau of Land Management did for a 230 kV project that our sister company, UNSC, is doing in the Kingman, Arizona area. As part of that, the BLM did a literature review of hundreds of different studies that have been conducted over several decades on impacts of transmission lines on residential property values. In summary, those studies are inconclusive, and they have varying degrees of impacts from no effect to different percentages of negative impacts on property values. The studies also stress that you really can't determine what, if any, impact the project would have on property value until after it's constructed. Studies have also shown that where there are negative impacts to property values, that those diminish to nearly zero within 5 years. So the study is available. The link is there on the presentation for you to review and draw your own conclusions.
Thank you, Renee. We have received some comments on electromagnetic fields as well. Just a definition on electromagnetic fields. Electric fields are produced by voltage, the strength or pressure with which an electric current flows. Magnetic fields are produced by current, the movement of electrons through a conductor. Please note that TEP takes the safety and health of the public very seriously, first and foremost. And there's been extensive research done in the field of electromagnetic fields as produced by transmission lines. And those studies throughout the years have found that EMFs produced by power lines are much weaker than those associated with other sources such as microwaves or radio waves. Those studies have also concluded that given the frequency, EMFs produced by power lines are considered non-ionizing because they are not known to damage DNA or cells directly. And EMFs produced by power lines dissipate the further away from the line you move. So just an example of some typical magnetic fields dissipated from typical household appliances. The chart on the left-hand side in the white, taking, for example, a hair dryer. The units of measure are milligauss. At 6 inches away, the measurement is 300 milligauss. And for a typical 115 kV line at 50 feet from the edge of right-of-way, we have 6.5 milligauss. So this is a lot less than a typical everyday household appliance.
Well, regarding transmission undergrounding, TEP received had a lot of dialogue with the public as well as comments. And because of the very urban nature of this project, TEP commissioned an undergrounding study to determine what the constructability and cost issues would be if the project were undergrounded. The net result of that study is that undergrounding the line would cost approximately 11 times what an overhead line would cost. And that goes to the point that TEP doesn't feel that we can underground transmission and put that on the backs of our ratepayers and still be able to maintain a stable rate base. A copy of that underground study can be found on our website at the link that's shown. Next slide. We also received a lot of comments on, again, the undergrounding issue, the significant additional costs should be borne by all customers, things along those lines. And again, as I mentioned previously, the Arizona legislature has provided the ability for municipalities to develop and accommodate undergrounding of utilities through an underground improvement district. And that is the methodology that would be used to get our transmission lines underground. That process would be formed and managed by the City of Tucson, and they would assess any extra undergrounding costs to property owners that would benefit from that undergrounding. More information on the process can be found at the link on the slide that we show. And TEP is more than willing to work with the city and the neighborhoods on such an improvement district should the neighborhoods pursue that. We also received a lot of comments regarding cost along the lines of Banner and the U of A should pay, or those needing the power such as developers should pay to underground. TEP can afford to bury the lines. How much will it cost the ratepayers? And if it were buried and all ratepayers had to pay, doesn't all of Tucson benefit because this center part of the city is a gem to all? And again, it's TEP's position that it would not be fair for us to invoke the high cost of undergrounding of transmission in one small area to benefit that small area and spread that cost to all customers throughout our service territory. And that's why we look to the neighborhoods to work with the city to develop an undergrounding district if they their own perceived benefit outweighs the cost to them. And the city will work with them to come up with an allocation mechanism. And all those who participate in that improvement district would have a cost share of that. So to the extent the property includes Banner, the U of A, or other developers, they would have to share in that cost in some fashion. But again, it's between those requesting that undergrounding district and the city of Tucson to work that out. We also received comments along the lines of, are there alternatives to a 138 kV line? What about using solar instead? Put solar at Banner and the U of A instead. Individuals who have solar saying they're not driving the needs, so why should they incur the burden of an overhead line? And questions, why isn't there a solar component? And also, have we looked at decentralized plants elsewhere in our system? And as I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between this transmission project and the generation resources that are going to be serving our customers. TEP fully supports renewables, and that's been evidenced in our recent filing of an integrated resource plan with the ACC, which is available on our website. And you'll see in there that TEP is targeting obtaining 70% of its power from renewables by 2035. And in association with that, reducing our carbon footprint by 80%. But for the renewables to be cost effective, and again, it goes back to a stable, reasonable rate for our customers, centralized scale, utility scale renewables are the most cost effective installations. And that is what TEP is looking to pursue in the future with both wind, solar, as well as battery storage. But in order to bring those renewables to the load, to our customers, all customers, we need a good backbone system. And this project is a piece of that backbone that we're trying to develop.
Thank you.
So we also received 390 comments related to the location of the facilities. Commenters often stated whether they preferred or didn't prefer a specific link that was being shown in the April 2020 update. So where we received those types of comments, we tallied them and we used that information in our analysis. But I want to stress that that is just one way that TEP looks at the information we are receiving. And I will go into the geospatial analysis later to give you, all of the other ways that we consider what's best for the community and this route. So that'll be after this question session.
Okay, thank you, Renee. As she stated, we do have another question session. Just wanted to state that questions that we don't get to on air, we do have a general Q&A session at the end. Hopefully, we want to be respectful of everyone's time as well. We're scheduled till 8 o'clock. Questions that we can't answer today, we will be responding to and post answers up on the project website. And also, in addition to that, Ed and Renee had made reference to links within this presentation. This presentation is available up on the project website, so those links you can find on there as well. So having said that, we have two different ways to ask questions again. We can text in at 520-302-5527. And if you would, please state your name and neighborhood in the text message, and also you can speak to a bilingual operator at 520-918-9206. And let's see, we've got a question. Okay, we've got a question from Jane McCollum with Marshall Foundation. Interesting, you are going through historic neighborhoods on Euclid and Campbell, so we are divided. Why aren't you looking at a route along I-10, along Grant Road, Sam Hughes, and Commercial Main Gate Square?
Maybe the question but do you want to answer that, or
oh,
I can?
No, I mean, you go for it.
Well, maybe I'll try an answer to that
Okay.
one. We have lines that go along I-10 that connect Grant Road to our Irvington plant. We're trying to develop an alternative path so that we get rid of radial lines on our system. And we use the term radial, and if you don't understand what that is, it's basically a one-way path. I would equate it to a cul-de-sac, where the person that lives at the end of the cul-de-sac can only get in and out on that one road. We're trying to develop the paths that provide alternate paths to and from each customer. And so it would be like a major thoroughfare where somebody living in the middle of that street can go either left or right on that street. So a route along I-10 and Grant Road doesn't really serve our purpose. Again, we also need to connect to the University of Arizona U of A sub, which is the center point of our load density in that middle part of the city. And so our purpose and need is to connect to that sub from the south and from the northwest And so that's why we're going from Grant and the freeway to the U of A sub, and then on south to Kino. We built Kino and put it in service this year. It was kind of phase one of a longer project. This is phase two. This provides the looping for the system through the center part of Tucson. And to alter the path to go along the interstate doesn't accomplish what we need to get done from a planning and reliability perspective.
Thank you, Ed. Text from Alex Richardson from Casas de Kino. If the line is built near my home and I can prove it negatively impacted my property values, will TEP compensate? Or is TEP somehow protected from any negative impacts on homeowners? And this is for Renee.
So TEP would not compensate for loss in property value. These projects are public improvement projects. They're for the good of the entire community, just as if the city of Tucson or Pima County had to build a road and it became a 4-lane road instead of a 2-lane road adjacent to your home, it might impact your property values as well. So the answer is no.
Thank you, Renee. Text from Andy Church. We've been told that routing the lines underground is too expensive, yet this is done all the time in other cities. Has TEP actually done any studies to examine feasibility of routing underground? Thank you for the question, Andy. Yes, as part of this project specifically, there's been a lot of requests to have this project placed underground. So TEP did hire a consultant to perform a study for undergrounding of the transmission line, and the results of this study did conclude that it is 11 times more expensive to underground transmission in an urban environment than overhead construction, as Mr. Beck had spoken to earlier. We do have the study available upon the TEP.com Kino to DeMoss-Petrie project, Kino to DeMoss-Petrie project website as well.
Eric, I might just tag on to that one, that the comment is related to the fact that a lot of cities have underground lines, and again, it depends on the voltage of the line. And we know there are cities that have some underground transmission lines, usually much higher voltage, through an urban core center of a major metropolitan area where you have no choice but to go underground. And so we have looked at the undergrounding issue from that perspective and other cities and what they have done. But again, we're trying to maintain not only reliable service, but also reasonable rates to our customers. And to try and spend 11 times as much for a transmission line doesn't fit with that model.
Thank you, Ed. Question from Robert Dorsey from Sam Hughes. There have been many studies quantifying the decrease in property values of residences adjacent or near high voltage power lines. These provide data which permits the impact on residences along the route to be estimated. Were estimates of the loss of property values along the routes under consideration included in the cost studies? This is to Renee.
So I did just discuss the study that we had done with the Bureau of Land Management in Kingman, Arizona. And as I said, the studies that have been done are, for the most part, done after the line is constructed. And then they calculate, whether there were or what percent of decline there were in property values after it was constructed. So there really isn't a formula or something that you can use to estimate in advance of construction what those impacts may be. And also, the studies show that every community, city, even neighborhoods within the same city may have different levels of impacts from a transmission line. Some areas may have no impacts, some areas may have greater impacts. So we haven't done any cost studies yet. We don't do those until we've narrowed the routes down more, but this information as far as I know, cannot be estimated and would not be included in the cost study. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you very much for the questions. At this time, it looks like we have no further, but if we have missed any, we are keeping track of everything. We're logging it, and questions that we are unable to answer to or just it's an oversight, we will go back through the log and make sure that we've responded accordingly and place those responses up on the project website. So now Renee will be covering the geospatial and constructability analysis. Oh, no. Excuse me, philosophy and criteria.
Shortly to be followed by the geospatial analysis. So this is TEP's design philosophy. We do our best to utilize existing road right-of-way as well as existing utility corridors to build our transmission lines, and that is so that we have a minimal impact on the surrounding areas. Also, wherever there are existing facilities that are in the same corridor as where the new transmission line would be, we either underground or retire those facilities in order to, clean up the area and make it not be so cluttered with multiple lines. And then throughout this process, as I said, since we kicked it off in September 2019, we communicate with the neighborhoods, with our stakeholders. We try to learn, what are the opportunities and constraints in each of these neighborhoods, and how can we develop the best alternative we can that is good for the whole community. Next slide, please. So, as I said, this project at this voltage requires approval from the Arizona Corporation Commission, and within those regulations, these are the criteria that we are required, and they are the minimum criteria that we analyze and put the information forth in the application for the Certificate of Environmental Compatibility. As I said, this is the minimum, and for example, for this project, we're also doing, in addition, the built environment study, because we are in proximity to historic districts and historic properties. So TEP uses geospatial analysis for most of our transmission line siting projects. It is one tool that we use to analyze and compare and contrast the different links, and then ultimately the different alternatives with each other, with the end goal of selecting a route that has the fewest constraints and is the best route for the community. So the phase 1 analysis, we started with the links, which are major road segments in the study area. And then our engineering team narrowed those down based on whether or not they felt, in the first look, whether they could be developed or not. And then we collected data on the historic neighborhoods, sensitive receptors, which are hospitals, schools, daycare centers, nursing homes. These are areas where there is a perceived sensitivity because of children or elderly or sick people are there. And then also residential use. So we move forward, please. So each of the links received a default score of 3, and then on top of that, it would receive a score of 1, 2, 3, depending on whether or not it came into proximity with the sensitive receptors, the historic properties, or the residential use. And then after that, once we had those scores, we layered all of those on top of each other and came up with what's called a composite score. So if we move on to, just move on to the maps. So this is all of the links that were considered in the phase 1 analysis, and where they're green, it means that they are not in proximity with historic properties. Where they've turned a yellow color, It means that they are adjacent to historic properties and therefore their score went down, and that's what made them turn yellow. And the same with, move on. The same with sensitive receptors. If the link is still green, then it is not adjacent to a sensitive receptor. If it turns yellow, then it was adjacent to a sensitive receptor. And the same with residential use. If it's dark green, it is not adjacent to residential use. If it's a lighter green, it is adjacent to residential use. And the reason this would be light green and not turn yellow is that residential use has a score of 2, whereas historic properties and sensitive receptors have a score of 1. So moving on to the next slide, this is a composite. So this is basically taking the link and adding all of those layers on top of each other so that you get where you have the darker, into the yellows and oranges is where you may have multiple factors. You may have residential use in a historic neighborhood, for example. So after that, all of that information that I just shared was in the April 2020 update that was provided online. And that's where we got the comments back from the stakeholders and the public and the community working group of the review of those links. We took that information as well as the engineering and constructability analysis, which is something that Eric will talk about in a moment. And we used that information to further look at the impacts of those factors on the links. So moving forward, this map shows public comment. So as I had said at the very beginning, where a comment mentioned a preference or not a preference for any specific link, those were tallied. So where you see red is where we received 19 to 38 more negative comments than positive comments. And where you see yellow is where we received 0 to 19 more negative comments than positive comments. And green is where we received 1 to 60 more positive comments than negative comments. And I do want to reiterate that this is just one way to look at the data. It isn't by no means a deciding factor. It's just part of the process and not the only factor in our decision model.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
As Renee had mentioned, part of the process is going through a constructability analysis, and what this does is we evaluate existing infrastructure, what conflicts might there be along the proposed routes. Some of the things we look at are existing utilities within the road right-of-way, such as existing gas, sewer, water, or fiber, existing utilities attached to structures that would need to be relocated. If we do have to relocate existing distribution, or sometimes they have existing communications attached to those as well. So we have to make sure that those communication attachments get relocated as well. We also have to maintain sidewalk ADA compliance, 4-foot width. So if a sidewalk isn't there, we have to make sure that there will be, even after the pole is placed, there will be room for a 4-foot sidewalk. We look for things such as storm drains and to see if all of this can fit within the existing road right-of-way. Some other constraints we consider are reliability constraints. As we are constructing the project, we want to ensure that we don't lose the ability to serve any load. So we make sure to run studies to make sure that the construction sequencing is correct. And then after we go through this whole evaluation, we score each constraint and provide an overall constructability score for each link. So what you see here is similar to what Renee had presented you, with the exception it's based on the constructability score. So the green is a 3, and that is good. That is constructible within those areas. The 2, it is a little less constructible due to existing conflicts with existing utilities. And the 1, it would be more difficult or very difficult, and 0, it's not going to happen. So as a result of this, we did eliminate 8 links that everyone has seen thus far. The links that we had removed were Plummer, East 19th, Glen, and a portion of Miracle Mile and a portion of Oracle. So we did have some links added at the request of some of the stakeholders. The links added are shown, identified in the black and white line. You can see towards the U of A North, the yellow triangle towards the right of the page there. There's a black and white line, and those links added are up north on Euclid to Helen, and then east on Helen to Park, and then north on Park. And that was at the request of the University of Arizona. And then the additional links added are down towards the existing Kino substation, which is the blue triangle. And once again, the links added are identified through the black and white line. And those links go up, I believe it's Cherry Bell Stravenue. And they were added at the request of Union Pacific Railroad to avoid the rail car yard area.
So this figure depicts the composite analysis as I showed in phase 1. This is the phase 2 composite analysis, so it combines that comment score as well as the constructability score. And where you see red is not good. It has the highest number of constraints, and where you see the dark green, that has the fewest number of constraints, and then there's the varying levels between the two.
So thank you for that. Once again, we have a question or comment period. Once again, my name's Eric, and I'm here with Renee Darling and Ed Beck talking about the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. We have several ways in which you can question or comment. You can either text message in at 520-302-5527, or you can call in and speak to an operator at 520-918-9206. We'll make every attempt to answer your questions on air, and we do have a question and answer period at the end. So let's get started. We have a text from Kurt Enck. Once again, if I mispronounce the names, I apologize. The historic neighborhoods are not responsible for the increasing demand. Don't you agree? And that's directed to Ed.
No, that's not necessarily the case. While there has been some reduction in load with certain houses as they've put in more efficient appliances and so on, there are others who are using more and different items in their home that use energy. And so we can't blanket say that the historic neighborhoods are not increasing demand. There are pockets within those neighborhoods that are increasing. So it's, from a blanket statement, no, we can't say that.
Thank you, Ed. We have a text from Dan from Sam Hughes. So this project only benefits those in the direct vicinity. That seemed to be the point the gentleman on the right made with regard to an undergrounding district. So I think that's to you, Ed.
I believe I was on the right in the picture. If that was the takeaway, then I wasn't very clear. The project will benefit all of our customers, but in particular, it highly benefits those within the whole study area, which is the area, the black boundary on the maps that we showed earlier. As far as the undergrounding district, that can be as extensive or as small as the neighborhoods and the city agree upon. And so if there's a 1-block stretch that needs to be undergrounded, that would be a possibility. If the whole project was proposed to be undergrounded that improvement district could cover the whole project. And then there would have to be a cost allocation mechanism amongst the property owners within that area as to who pays and how much they pay. So there's a whole process to that. Again, it's a city-driven process, but we're more than happy to participate in that process to assist in moving it along.
Thank you, Ed. We have another question, a text from Jonathan from Iron Horse. If power lines are put down Euclid, how many houses and sidewalks will be destroyed? First of all, it's not our intent to destroy any sidewalks or houses. We want to place the line within the existing right-of-way to the extent possible. And currently, no route has been determined. These are just routes that we're asking for feedback from on the public. We'll be going over the routes that we're going to be presenting to you here in the next few slides. I don't know, Renee, do you have anything you want to add to that?
So if sidewalks were destroyed as part of the project, TEP would certainly, replace the sidewalks, and the city has indicated where that may happen. We would have to replace the sidewalks with the 4-foot ADA sidewalk, even if it's the current existing sidewalk is not a 4-foot ADA sidewalk.
Thanks. And continuing on with the same question from Jonathan, how have the plans changed since receiving public input? Have alternate routes that don't impact historic neighborhoods been considered? So we have, we'll be presenting the routes to you in just the next few slides. So we have considered, to the extent possible, all the options to get from Kino to UA North. I don't know if there's any way to avoid historic neighborhoods. Ed, I can see.
Specifically to public input, we've taken public input and we're utilizing that as part of our process to develop the routes that we're bringing forward. So we have considered that. Have routes that don't impact historic neighborhoods been considered? Part of the problem that we have is the TEP infrastructure is historic. And that's why we're looking to replace and build this project, is to support the needs within those neighborhoods. And so we can't serve the needs of those neighborhoods without somehow impacting the neighborhoods to some degree. But we want to do it with as little impact as we can.
Yeah, to add on to that, what Ed said with regards to the age of the existing infrastructure, I did pull data with regards to infrastructure age within the area. It ranges from as old as 72 years to as young as just a few years. So the infrastructure within the area is in need of replacement. So a text from Jim Sam Hughes. Where in Tucson can we see an example of the lines at issue? We do have 138 kV transmission lines all over. We just constructed a new line from our Irvington facility to our new Kino substation, and that is at on 36th Street and Park, and also on 22nd Street. You can see the 138 kV transmission lines. And Ed, did you have something?
I'm just not sure if we may have actually provided some locations previously in response to a question. And to the extent we didn't, we can provide, some specific locations to go see what these structures look like, or similar structures.
Okay. Okay. I think to be respectful of everyone's time, we were going to be moving on. We understand we do have additional questions. We will be trying to answer those at the end if possible, but to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll be going over an overview of the preliminary routes moving forward. So we do have in front of you 10 routes for consideration that can be combined to make up a total of 18 routes to get from Kino to UA North to DMP. The routes shown from Kino to UA North have been identified as a number, and the routes shown from UA North to DeMoss-Petrie, and I keep saying DMP, I apologize there, have been identified with a letter. There are several combinations that we are avoiding for reliability purposes. We don't want to have two circuits serving the same substation placed on the same structure. If we lost that structure, we'd lose the ability to feed that substation. So those have been identified on the map shown below. So we do have here corridor 1, and we do have some videos that we'll be presenting. We're not going to present a video for every one of the routes that we'll be viewing. However, they are available on the project webpage just for consideration of time to make sure we can get through all the questions. But I do believe corridor 1 is one that we'll be watching a video on. So Route 1 corridor overview. Note up in the upper left-hand corner is a navigation tool to help you along where you're viewing. So we are going north on South Kino Parkway. And please note that this just represents the center line of the corridor, not the actual placement of the structures. That has not been determined yet. This is just a route to get from point A to B, Kino to UA North. So now we jump off at 22nd Street. And from 22nd Street, we go up Cherry Avenue to South Kino Parkway. And continuing north on South Kino Parkway. And approaching the University of Arizona area. And here we turn at Elm and Ring and enter into the planned UA North substation. So as I've said, we do have a video for every one of these routes. They are available on the project webpage, and we won't be going through all of them, just several of them this evening. So we have Corridor 2, very similar to Corridor 1, with the exception of we go, instead of heading west on South 36 and north on South Campbell, we head east on, East 36. And head north on South Campbell. And here we have Corridor 3. This is a little different than Corridor 1 or 2. The southern portion is the same until we get to 17th Street. And then from 17th Street, we head north on Highland, and then east on Manlove Street. North on Fremont to Broadway, and then west on Broadway to Euclid, and Euclid to Helen, and Helen to Park, and then Park will take us to the alleyway to terminate at the UA North substation. And this is very similar to what we just saw, with the exception of rather than go north past Speedway to Helen, we turn right on Speedway to Vine and go from Vine directly to the UA North substation. And this is very similar to Corridor 3, with the exception of rather than going South Kino Parkway, we go South Campbell. And this is very similar to Corridor 4, with the exception again, going South Kino Parkway, we go South Campbell on the southern portion. Now we'll be moving on from preliminary corridors from UA North to DeMoss-Petrie. From here we go north on Vine and west on Grant to the DeMoss-Petrie substation. And from here, this is Corridor B. From here, we go down the alleyway to Park, north to Grant, terminate at the DeMoss-Petrie Substation. And Corridor C, we have a video on, so I'll let that do the talking. Okay, from the planned UA North substation, we head south on Vine. To Speedway, we head west. Once again, this line represents the center line of the corridor, not the actual location of any structures. Neither side of the road has been determined, nor has the route been approved. And once again, this is Corridor C. We head north on Oracle, which turns into Main, or Main, which turns into Oracle. And at Grant, we head west. And terminate at the DeMoss-Petrie substation. So the last corridor to present is Corridor D, where we head east on Elman Ring and head north on Campbell, and then west on Grant Road to the DeMoss-Petrie substation. Once again, all of these can be combined with the exception as shown. The exceptions is shown to make the route to get from Kino to UA North to DeMoss-Petrie. And Renee?
Thank you. So the preliminary routes that were just shown were based on a quantitative geospatial analysis that used residential use, historic properties, and sensitive receptors, as well as the constructability, and then a qualitative look at the comments in order to pull together 18 route combinations that could be constructed to serve the project need. The routes have not been analyzed yet, so that is the next phase. That's route 3 of the phase 3 of the route analysis. We will continue to collect data from our stakeholders, information from the public. We will have the additional results from the built environment study to include in the analysis. And that will help us to narrow these 18 route combinations down to something smaller that will be presented in the next virtual open house meeting. We have a series of maps to show you, and what it is we just took the raw data from the residential use, historic properties and sensitive receptors and put it onto the route maps just to give the public some baseline information to help in assessing, the differences between the routes. And you will see a lot of similarities from route to route, but there are differences as well. And I'll just show you the first one and let you know where you see dark green means that that area is not being influenced by any of the factors. And as you move into a light green, it means that probably residential use is influencing the route in that area, and where you see yellow or into the orange colors is where you have historic properties or sensitive receptors that are impacting the route. So we're just going to slowly scroll through them and let you take a look at them. I'm not going to interpret every one for you so that we have time to answer questions at the end. I did also want to let you know that on TEP's project webpage there is a study called the Interim Citing study, and that study outlines the methodology of the geospatial analysis and also provides all of the details, scores for each resource on each link, and then ultimately on each in both the phase 1 and the phase 2 analysis. Eventually that report will be expanded upon as we complete our phase 3 analysis, and that report is included in our application to the Arizona Corporation Commission. So please take a look at that citing study and feel free to contact us with any questions or comments related to it. So this is Route 3. And again, you're seeing, the lighter green where it's up against residential use, and the orangish yellow is where it's going through a historic district or neighborhood. Okay, so this chart is in that citing study that I just mentioned, but it's basically the scores behind the maps that you just saw. So on the left, you'll see the route number, you'll see the length of that route, and then the percent of adjacency to historic properties, to residential use, and sensitive receptors. And then you'll see a composite score, and then you'll see the constructability also added in on the right, and a total average score of that additional factor. So again, it's probably hard to see on your screens, but the study is there for download.
Thank you, Renee. Now we have created a simulation of what the project may look like. This is just an example. We have not chosen any routes, but it does represent one of the routes we're presenting today, but it does not represent one of the routes, a preferred route or anything. So what we've identified here in yellow are the actual location of the structures. You can see as you move further into the picture, there's the yellow arrows indicating location of the structures. The height of the structure shown is approximately 75 feet to 85 feet above grade, depending upon the span or distance between the structures. These are the tubular weathering steel structures, and their standard is they're placed between 600 and 1,000 feet apart, and there's typically 5 to 9 structures per mile. So we do have a fly-through simulation created from Google Earth. It is Google Earth imagery. It's not the most current imagery. Just to note as well, we couldn't get any lower or else we lose the 3D aspect of this. So we're heading north on Campbell Avenue. As you can see, the simulation on the left side or west side of Campbell Avenue. And this is not an approved route or a final design, just a simulation to demonstrate what the project might look like should Campbell Ave be chosen. And we'll be showing also an additional simulation on Grant. And it'll be on the north side of the road as we head west on Grant. And the span length between these, again, is between 600 and 900 feet. These are the tubular weathering steel monopoles. The poles on the left side of the road are, it's old 3D imagery. They've since been replaced. And once again, this is not an approved route, just a demonstration as to what the project may look like should Grant be selected. So we have another question or comment break. Thank you for all of the questions and comments. We don't have much left in the presentation, so we're going to start right off with the questions so we can be sure to capture as many as possible. This is a text from K.R. Winter and Sam Hughes. The existing 138 kV line already goes up to DeMoss-Petrie, so why not follow it up to approximately downtown, then east to UA? And that is directed to Ed.
Yeah, so consistent with what I had said earlier, putting the line parallel and adjacent to that existing line doesn't provide us the redundancy and the alternate paths that we're looking for. In addition, we need to connect the Kino substation, which today is a radial line. It needs to be connected so it becomes a looped line for our system. So the starting point for us is not Irvington, it is Kino. That is north of the interstate. And we need to connect the U of A sub, which is generally in the vicinity of the U of A hospital. That location being determined by load center for the load density in the area, as well as available land. And there was not really a lot of land available in locations where we could build a substation that was in the vicinity of that load center. And short of demolishing a historic home to make room for a substation, that was the only site we could find that was reasonable. And it goes through a city process for citing that substation location. Going up to DMP, again, it's the alternate path is what we're looking for, as well as getting transmission into the central part of Tucson. Could the line have gone up and gone across Grant and back again? If we put two circuits on the same structure, we're not getting the redundancy that we're looking for. And those are some of the requirements that are required by national standards that we have to meet.
Thank you, Ed. We have a text from Ken Wiley at Jefferson Park. What about undergrounding the line from the U of A substation up to Grant, just 5 blocks, not 1.5 miles? As Ed has spoken to, if an underground district is created, that option could happen. However, TEP is an overhead transmission utility. And so, Ed, would you like to add anything to this?
Well, again, consistent with what I've said earlier, is that there is an undergrounding district process that was created by the state legislature with the understanding that in particular neighborhoods, the neighborhood might want to have utilities put underground. So they came up with that process, and rather than burden all ratepayers and customers with the cost of an undergrounding project, it's up to the individual municipality at the urging of neighborhoods and or individuals to come up with that district to fund the incremental cost. TEP has no problem putting the line underground as long as we don't have to burden all of our customers with that additional cost. And that is our major concern. Again, we're trying to keep our rates low and stable, and building lines that cost 11 times as much does not fit with that model.
Thank you, Ed. We have a text from Mark Walgast from Jefferson Park. If the transmission lines are aligned along Vine or any other narrow residential street, how will that accommodate the oversized poles? Will the street be closed to accommodate them? We'll make every effort to build the transmission line within the existing right-of-way. The street will not be closed. If Vine were chosen and the poles could not fit within the existing right-of-way, we would acquire easements as necessary, but the street will not be closed to accommodate the poles.
Maybe just to jump on that one, Eric, the poles will be a little bit larger than what you see as our distribution poles. They're not huge, and we've seen some signage that has been put out that is not necessarily to scale. And so, again, as I said earlier, we'll provide some locations where you can go see what some of these poles look like. And they're not as large as they're being made out to be. Yes, they are bigger than what's out there today. But you look at poles along, for example, Grant Road, the 46 kV, they're going to be very similar to what those poles are like, size-wise.
And thank you, Ed. Thanks for the additional comment there. And can we scroll the teleprompter up? I can't see the last question. We have a question, a text from Karen Schreiber of Jefferson Park. Isn't population growth happening east of the city? Why is the substation being built in a historic area versus further east in non-historic areas? The load growth is throughout the city. It isn't just the east side of Tucson. I was talking with Ed and Renee earlier today. The current trend has been this past year that each month has been hotter than the last, and our load growth, even though there are a lot of us working from home, schools aren't in session, our system load has increased from what we've seen in the past. So, and that is citywide. It isn't just the east versus the central versus the west. It is the whole service territory. And as Ed spoke to as well, this project is needed to help create that backbone for our system to bring in those renewables. We have a text from Ed and Linda Waymeyer. Sam Hughes, has the U of A indicated a preferred route from their perspective? At this time, they have not identified a preferred route. We have just proposed the routes, presented the routes this evening. The community working group was presented the routes last Thursday, and I believe there's probably members from the community working group listening in as well, so thanks for listening in again. But the U of A has not identified a preferred route at this time. We have a text from Ken Wiley, Jefferson Park. My house is on Vine, one of the 4 routes. Vine is not 100-foot wide. Please explain what a 100-foot right-of-way means. The 100-foot right-of-way would be if we were to not utilize existing road right-of-way. If we were to acquire an easement to place the transmission line on, we would require 100-foot right-of-way. But if we can utilize the existing road right-of-way, we'll make every attempt to put the transmission line within that road right-of-way. So we've got another text now that it has been added. Will there be time for further public feedback on it? What is the reasoning behind the new Helen Street route in the 800 to 900 block? And the Helen Street has been added at the request of the University of Arizona as one of the links, and there will be time for feedback on that. As Renee will speak to later on, she'll go over how to comment. And that's what we're seeking as we present these routes to you, seeking feedback on routes. So anything to add there, Renee? Ed? No? Okay, a text from Martha Roberts. Why was it decided to site the UA substation near UMC in a residential area near sick people with greater sensitivity?
Well, again, there's a couple of drivers for the location of the substation site. The first and foremost is, as we do studies of what our system load and development of our system looks like, we identify what we call a load center. So it's the area where a load of the particular study area or region is concentrated. And that fell pretty close to the U of A hospital. Not exactly, but pretty close to it. Further, we went on from a land perspective and had our land department research available properties, open land, land for sale, where potentially we could build a substation. And they were few and far between and hard to come by a site that would accommodate what we needed. The U of A stepped up and said they had a site that they were looking to modify in the future and that it could become available for purposes of a substation. So that's why that substation location was chosen. Just so you know, it's right next door to an existing 46 kV substation of the U of A. And this will to some degree replace that substation. So that's why that substation is there. The sensitive receptor issue is part of our analysis. And so if you take a look at our Citing study, you're going to see some references to that. And when you see the geospatial analysis, that's been accounted for, at least in the numbers that we look at as we cite the project. But again, there are no statistics or studies or issues that show there is any problem with either a transmission line or a substation and its adjacency to people. So that's how we came upon that substation location.
I would add to that the sensitive receptors have a 300-foot buffer, and Banner Hospital is much further than 300 feet from the proposed substation. And as Eric had indicated on the EMF chart, that beyond 100 feet, you have 0 EMF from the transmission line.
Thank you. We are receiving a lot of questions, but in order to keep on schedule, we're going to either address those at the end of the presentation or we'll address those after the presentation. So thank you very much for the questions and comments as we move on to next steps. Renee?
We're actually really almost done, and we'll have plenty of time for additional questions. So I think I've said throughout the meeting, the next steps for the project are to continue to collect comments from the public and our stakeholders, to update any analysis that we need to do with additional or new data that we receive, such as that built environment study that I mentioned. We will hold another community working group meeting, number 5, in September, as well as another virtual open house meeting prior to filing our application, which we plan to do so in November of 2020. The line siting committee hearing we're anticipating in January 2021, and the Arizona Corporation Commission open meeting in March of 2021. Note that all of these future dates are subject to change depending on what our response is to the pandemic. There is lots of information regarding this project on our project webpage. This presentation has been recorded and it will be available. There are the videos that Eric mentioned of each route. There is a PDF of this presentation as well. You'll find past newsletters, past community working group meeting materials. You'll find Q&A, questions and answers that are like typical questions and answers that we get on the project. You'll also receive all of the comments we have received to date, along with our responses to those comments. And then the studies that we've mentioned throughout the presentation, the underground study and the interim siting study, and eventually the built environment study. So we do ask that for this phase of the project that you submit any comments related to these 18 route combinations. by September 13th of 2020. That will allow us to move forward into the phase 3 analysis and narrow down the routes. This is not by any means the last opportunity to comment, though. As I've probably said multiple times throughout the meeting, comments are ongoing literally up until the Arizona Corporation Commission makes a decision. And this slide will show you all of the different methods by which you could comment following this meeting. So if you tomorrow decide that you want to add additional comments or have any questions, you can contact us via any of these means. So I think that's...
I think, yes, now we have, that is the end of the presentation, and we will address as many questions as we can, being respectful of everyone's time. We can extend the meeting an additional 15 minutes, I would suggest, and questions that we're unable to answer live on air, we'll be sure to place answers and responses to on the project webpage. So let's see, Ed, we have a text. Will transmission lines hum?
Yes, so the transmission lines in inclement weather, primarily rainy weather, can have a small hum or a little bit of crackle or static. But usually when that weather is occurring, the noise from the line is not very noticeable. Other than when there is bad weather, there is very little noise. And again, we'll provide locations where you can go out and see what similar poles will look like, and you can hear and listen for any hum on those lines to get an idea.
Thank you, Ed. And just to mention the methods at which we can, we request you ask questions again. We do have the text message option at 520-302-5527. And we have the call-in option at 520-918-9206. And we ask that you please state your name in the text message. So thank you for all the questions as they keep coming in. We have a text from Jeannie from Sam Hughes. Your maps and videos are very helpful. Is this analysis the same as what you did for the Irvington power plant to the new Kino substation? And that's for Renee.
Well, thank you. We appreciate positive feedback, and yes, it is the same as what we did for the Irvington to Kino project. And that application and all of the studies we did for that project are on the website also, if you want to look at what it is we file with the Arizona Corporation Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a text from Karen Schreiber of Jefferson Park. Your reports say that the poles can, if needed, be taller than 100 feet. No guarantee how many taller and how many poles. The design hasn't been completed yet, so I think that's kind of a statement, not necessarily a question.
Well,
but
maybe just to jump on that one, the 100-foot or greater than 100-foot would be specific issues with clearance that we run into along the route. So if at a road crossing where we're crossing the railroad, where we cross any major roadway, we might have to have a taller pole there just because of the existing features that are on the ground at that location. Again, typically our poles are going to be in that 85-foot range. Those much taller poles are going to be very specific to clearance needs that we come across as we're designing and laying out that line.
Yeah, and to Ed's point, the example he gave crossing a railroad, not only do we have to account for clearance from ground to wire, but also from the rail car to the conductor as well. So that does drive the height of the poles a little taller. The same thing for any arterial crossings. Additional question, why isn't the UA substation being built on UA land? I believe Ed, well, it is being built on.
Well, just it's being built on land that will belong to TEP when all is said and done. We are buying the property from the U of A. This is going to be a TEP substation, not a U of A substation. Our typical naming convention for substations is to get features that are in the vicinity of the station and use that as a substation name. The most obvious pick for the location where the substation site was located was U of A North Substation. It gives the wrong appearance or understanding. This is not a substation for the U of A. It's a substation for the area, and we've named it U of A North just because that's kind of our naming convention. But in the end, the property will be owned by TEP, and the substation will be serving TEP customers, one of which is the U of A, but it's serving all customers in the area.
Thank you. Text from Edward Cruz at Feldman's. Who are the stakeholders you are working with at the university on this, and how does a neighborhood group achieve stakeholder status to work with you in the same way? That's for Renee.
So TEP is working with a number of different, departments at the U of A. So there's not one specific person or entity that we're working with. And the neighborhood groups are stakeholders in the process. They just have a different name, and it's called the Community Working Group. So every neighborhood is invited to join the Community Working Group, and they have a representative or multiple representatives that attend the Community Working Group meetings. And it's the responsibility of those representatives of the neighborhoods to take the information that they learn in those community working group meetings back to their neighborhoods, and to also bring, opinions and, identification of opportunities and constraints within their neighborhood to us through the community working group. So absolutely, neighborhoods are a stakeholder. They just kind of have a different label.
Thank you. We have a text from Connie from Jefferson Park. Could the street islands on North Campbell be used as a location for the 138 kV transmission line? I do not believe the city would allow this. This would pose a safety hazard as well as a possible reliability issue should the pole get struck being in the middle of an island. So I don't think that would be an option, especially I don't believe the city would allow that.
But again, Eric, if that's a comment that we received, we will reach out to the city to talk about that issue. And to Eric's point, for liability reasons, the city likely would not want to go there. But that doesn't mean we'll just ignore the comment. So if you submit that as a written comment, we will at least have that discussion with the city transportation department.
And you don't have to submit it as a written comment. This is actually a written comment in this form. We can take that. Take it in this,
Yep.
yeah.
Valid point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
And maybe just to tack on to the stakeholder issue, the U of A doesn't have a special stakeholder status. So I kind of got that feeling that was where that question was directed. They are a stakeholder just like any member of the public is a stakeholder, as are the neighborhood associations. So we use the neighborhood associations to be part of our sounding board for the information we're bringing forward to you, the public, as we go forward with this process. But we're not treating any particular group as a more important or different stakeholder than any other. So the U of A doesn't have special status. Banner doesn't have special status. No developers have special status. All of our stakeholder input is considered and is part of our process, and is also important to the deliberations at the Corporation Commission when we get there.
And can I tag onto that again? So stakeholders, that term is often also used for the entities that we're getting data from. So they usually have facilities in the study area, such as other utilities, or the U of A, they have buried utilities on the campus, Banner Hospital in relation to the helicopter flight paths. So it's an entity in the study area that we're asking to provide us data. The city of Tucson is a stakeholder. We get their future road project plans and things like that, so that we can look ahead to see where the future road right-of-ways are and things like that.
we have another text from Elizabeth from Iron Horse. In the underground cost study, why do just the underground wires cost more than the entire project per mile? above ground?
So relative to the underground study, it would be helpful if you could provide a direct reference, because you may be seeing something in that report that is talking specifically to the cost of the wire itself. And the wire, of course, is much more expensive because our overhead conductor is just bare aluminum conductor that gets put up in the air, whereas the underground conductor is wrapped in some pretty expensive insulating materials. And so the cost per foot, for example, of that underground wire is much more. Relative to the general cost, the $16.4 million per 1.5 miles compares to the 1.5 million per mile for overhead. So the underground 16.4 million, overhead was at 1.5 million. And that's for the same distance, a 1.5 mile distance. And that's just what our consultant did. They took a 1.5 mile versus a 1 mile. And you get to the same point mathematically, but it's 11 times the cost. But if there's something specific that you have a further question relative to the wire itself, if you can point to a specific point within that study, we can respond to that.
Thank you. We have a text from Janet Grayson. Do dotted lines on the map on postcard mailed to city residents correspond with the only possibilities for the new lines, or are other routes within the dark lines or the study area being considered for the new lines?
So the dotted lines do represent the only routes that we are currently considering for the project. There are no other routes under consideration at this point in the study area.
And they're clearly shown on the one map that shows the routes.
Right, they're not clearly shown on the postcard. We understand that was a very small map, but if you go to the project webpage, there are several different maps showing both all of the routes on one map as well as individual, each route on an individual map that will show you what's currently being considered.
Okay, thank you. We have another text from Susan at Sam Hughes. You explain the impact studies on property value could only be done after the fact. What average decline in values were shown in the studies that have been done?
Thank you, Susan. I believe that it's about 6%, but I am not 100% sure, so we will update this response in the written questions, but I think it was around 6%.
But again, that is an immediate impact of roughly 6%.
Yes, that's the immediate after the construction when the study is completed, and that dissipates over time as. Yeah.
Which I think was in the range of 5 years.
In the range of 5 years, right. And that's not, as I said, some studies show no decline, some studies may show a greater decline than 6%, but she asked for the average, and I believe what we had determined was around 6%. If you go to the BLM study that I referenced earlier, that clearly says what it is also, but I will respond in the written comments as well.
We have a text from Matt from Iron Horse. What specific quality of life indexes are used in your analysis for impacted neighborhood residences? That's the first part of the question.
Okay, so we don't use quality of life indexes. We use the specific resources such as residential use, sensitive receptors, and things like that. The weight against economic variables is done in the next phase of the analysis. So phase 3 of the analysis not only includes the collection of additional data, but we do what's called a multi-objective decision model, and that's where those criteria that I showed at the beginning of the meeting are, each one is weighted against another. So the factors that are more important to the project are weighted higher. So in this case, based on public comment that we're getting, it's assumed that historic properties, residential use are going to be weighted much higher than, say, cost in identifying what is the preferred route.
And continuing on with that question, and how are they weighted? Oh, I think you against economic variables.
That's the question I just answered, sorry.
Yeah.
So how is Tucson High scored in your analysis? Tucson High is a sensitive receptor, so around the entire property is a 300-foot buffer, and any portion of the link that touches that 300-foot buffer is scored a 1 on a scale of 1 to 3, where 1 is the lowest.
And we have another question from a text from Bill Craig and Sam Hughes. Where specifically in the middle of the city of Tucson do you have 85-foot poles? Off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure, but we will definitely find a location and respond and provide you with that location. If we don't have your direct contact info, we'll provide that information on the web page. So in respect of everyone's time tonight, our last question is for Renee. A call from Tina Pacheco with Salmon's Neighborhood. Will there be another meeting with final decisions?
So there will be another meeting prior to making any final decisions, and that meeting will be after we've done the multi-decision objective model, we've weighted all the scores, and we've narrowed down the alternatives. So that meeting will provide, I don't know how many alternatives beyond, right now we have 18 route combos, but that will be reduced, and we will present those in the next virtual open house meeting, and then we'll collect comments on whatever remaining routes there are, and that will help us in deciding which route we select as our preferred to put into the application, and how many, up to 1 or 2, or if there may be more additional alternative routes that go into the application.
All right, in respect of everyone's time, we will be concluding the meeting at this time. Any questions that we were unable to answer at this time, we will provide responses to all of the questions received thus far and questions we haven't answered thus far on the project website. We'd like to thank everyone for all of their input, and we would very much appreciate the comments on the routes that we've presented moving forward. And as Renee had said, I believe that timeline is September 13th. Yes. And if we could get one more slide up, we do have a live stream survey that we are asking the public, people who attended this, if they found this helpful. And this can be found on the TEP.com Kino to DeMoss-Petrie project webpage, as identified there with the orange circle. If you could, please provide feedback. We appreciate all the feedback. We recognize this is an important project to the public as well as TEP. As we've demonstrated, there is a need for this project as the energy demand within the study area has grown. As I spoke to earlier, it seems like every month is getting hotter than the last during the summer months, and our system load, even though offices are not in session, school is not in session, our system load has continued to increase this year, and we want to make sure that we can continue to provide that safe, reliable power that we've committed to do. So we very much appreciate all your input tonight. I'd like to thank everyone else on the TEP team as well, because this was a big effort, a coordination effort to get everyone involved and to get this broadcast. I've worked with a lot of different team members here within the company that I hadn't even met before this project, so I appreciate that opportunity as well. And thank you all for your time, and remember to stay socially distant and mask up Tucson.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.